Imagine a bright, sunny Saturday morning. The sun is shining high in the sky, making everything look happy and warm. In a little neighborhood where houses sit close together, it's super quiet. You can hear birds singing their sweet songs, tweet, tweet, tweet. The grass on every lawn is cut nice and short, like a green carpet. Everything feels perfect, like a picture from a storybook. No one is yelling, no cars are honking. It's just peaceful. That's where we meet Jake Miller. He's a regular guy who just moved into this calm, sleepy place. He's the new kid on the block, and nobody really pays much attention to him. Jake looks like an ordinary person. He's not super tall or super loud. He doesn't wear fancy clothes or drive a big, shiny car. He's just Jake. He's the kind of guy who likes to stay quiet and keep to himself. When he walks outside, he waves at people with a small, shy smile. "Hi," he says softly, and then he keeps going. Most of the neighbors don't even stop to talk to him. They see him and think, "Oh, that's just the new guy." They don't know much about him, and they don't really care. He's not loud or exciting, so they don't notice him much. But here's the thing, and listen close because this is important. Jake has a secret. A really, really big secret. And soon, that secret is going to shake up this quiet little street in a way nobody expects. Let's paint the picture a little more. Jake's house is small and simple. It's painted white with a red door, and it sits at the end of the road. He doesn't have a big garden or fancy lights. He just has a little yard with a flagpole stuck in the ground. The flagpole isn't huge, but it's tall enough to stand out a bit. On top, there's a plain flag flapping in the breeze. It's not a crazy color or anything wild, just a normal flag. When Jake moved in, he put that flagpole up right away. Nobody thought much of it. "Oh, he likes flags," they said with a shrug. But that flagpole? It's part of his secret. Yep, it's a clue, but nobody knows it yet. Not the neighbors, not the kids playing outside, not even the nosy lady who watches everyone. They all think Jake is boring. But boring? Oh no, Jake is anything but boring. Now, think about this neighborhood for a second. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. People chat over their fences about the weather or whose dog barked last night. Kids ride their bikes up and down the street, laughing and racing. Moms and dads sit on porches, sipping lemonade and waving at cars that pass by. It's friendly, sure, but it's also sleepy. Nothing big ever happens here. No wild adventures, no loud fights, no surprises. At least, that's what everyone thinks. They've gotten used to their quiet days and calm nights. They like it that way. So when Jake showed up, nobody thought he'd change anything. He's just a guy, they said. He won't make trouble. But trouble? It's coming. And Jake's the one bringing it quietly, sneakily, with that little smile of his. Let's talk about Jake some more. He's not old, but he's not super young either. Maybe he's the age of a cool uncle, someone who's fun but doesn't act silly all the time. He has brown hair that's a little messy, like he doesn't brush it too much. His eyes are friendly, but they're sharp, too, like he's always watching, even when he's pretending not to. He wears plain shirts and jeans, nothing fancy. When he walks, he doesn't rush. He takes his time, looking around, nodding at people. If you saw him, you'd think, he's nice, but he's not special. And that's exactly what Jake wants you to think. He's tricky like that. He's hiding something huge, and he's really good at keeping it a secret. Here's a fun question for you. Have you ever met someone who seemed totally normal, like just a regular person, but then bam, they turned out to be way more interesting than you thought? Maybe it was a kid at school who seemed quiet but was secretly awesome at soccer. Or maybe it was a teacher who looked boring but told the wildest stories. Jake's like that. To everyone on the street, he's just the new guy with the flagpole. Nobody wonders about him. Nobody asks, "Hey, Jake, what's your deal?" They just walk by, busy with their own stuff. But if they stop to look closer, they might notice something. Like how Jake's smile gets a tiny bit bigger when people ignore him. Or how he's always out in his yard, checking that flagpole, even when there's no wind. Little hints, little clues, but nobody sees them yet. So, why does Jake keep to himself? Why doesn't he talk more or make friends? Well, that's part of the secret, too. He's not here to be loud or show off. He's here for something else, something big and sneaky. This quiet neighborhood, with its chirping birds and neat lawns, is about to get a wake-up call. And it all starts with Jake Miller, the guy nobody notices. The guy with the flagpole. The guy who's hiding something so wild, it's going to make everyone's jaw drop. What's his secret? How's it going to shake things up? You'll find out soon, I promise. This story is just getting started, and trust me, it's going to surprise you big time. Before we keep going, let me ask you something fun. Where are you right now? Are you at home, maybe sitting on your couch? Or are you outside, feeling the sun like Jake does? Tell me in the comments below. And if you like stories where regular people turn out to be super cool, stick around. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet, because Jake's adventure is about to get wild. You don't want to miss it? His secret is waiting, and it's going to flip this neighborhood upside down. Ready? Let's see what happens next. Now, let's meet someone new in the story, Karen Thompson. She's like the boss of the neighborhood, but not in a fun way. Karen is the queen of something called the HOA. That's a group of people who make rules for the neighborhood, like how your yard should look or what you can put outside your house. Karen loves those rules more than anything. She's the kind of person who's always watching, peeking out her window with her sharp eyes. If something doesn't look perfect to her, she's ready to jump on it like a cat chasing a mouse. She wants everything to be just how she likes it, no mess, no surprises, no changes. From the very first day Jake Miller moved into his little white house with the red door, Karen was watching him. She didn't like him right away. Why? Because of that flagpole in his yard. Remember the flagpole? The one with the plain flag flapping in the wind? Karen hated it. It's too tall, she'd yell to anyone who would listen. She'd stand on her porch, waving her arms, telling the neighbors, that flagpole is ruining our street. It makes our houses look bad. It's going to ruin our property values. Property values are how much a house is worth, and Karen thought Jake's flagpole was making everyone's houses worth less money. She didn't even say hi to Jake first, she just started complaining. Karen wasn't quiet about it either. She'd march around the neighborhood with a clipboard in her hand. A clipboard is like a flat board with paper on it, and she used it to write down all the things she didn't like. She'd walk up and down the street, her shoes clicking on the sidewalk, pointing at things and barking orders. Cut your grass shorter, she'd tell one neighbor. Move that bike, she'd shout at a kid. She acted like she owned the whole place, not just her own house. Everyone knew Karen, and most people were a little scared of her. When she talked, her voice was loud and bossy, and her face would get all scrunched up like she was mad at the world. When Karen saw Jake's flagpole, she decided it was her biggest problem. She'd stand in front of his house, staring at it with her hands on her hips. That thing has to go, she'd say. She didn't care that Jake was new or that he seemed nice. To her, he was breaking the rules, and that was all that mattered. One day, she walked right up to Jake while he was outside watering his little yard. Hey, you, she shouted, pointing at him. That flagpole is an eyesore. It's ugly and wrong, and I'm sick of looking at it. An eyesore is something that looks bad, and Karen thought the flagpole was the worst thing she'd ever seen. Her face turned red, bright like a tomato, and her voice got louder. I'm warning you, if you don't take it down, I'm calling the cops. Jake didn't say much back. He just stood there, holding his water hose, looking at her with calm eyes. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly, nodding his head a little. His voice was soft, not mad or scared. He didn't argue or yell. He didn't tell her to go away. He just said, yes, ma'am, and went back to watering his grass. Karen huffed, turned around, and stomped off, thinking she'd won. The neighbors saw it happen. Some of them were outside, sitting on their porches or walking their dogs. They watched Karen yell and Jake stay quiet. Poor Jake, they whispered to each other. He's scared of her. He's not going to fight back. But here's a little hint for you, something sneaky and exciting. Jake wasn't scared. Not even a tiny bit. Everyone thought he was afraid because he didn't yell back or make a fuss. When Karen shouted, he didn't look worried. His face stayed calm, and his little shy smile didn't go away. The neighbors didn't know it, but Jake wasn't shaking in his shoes. He wasn't hiding from Karen or her big, loud voice. Nope. He was letting her talk. He was letting her think she was in charge. Why? Because Jake had a plan. That secret we talked about? It was still hiding, and Karen didn't have a clue. Let's think about Karen for a minute. She's tall and skinny, with hair that's always pulled back tight. She wears glasses that sit low on her nose, and she's always pushing them up when she talks. Her clothes are neat, never wrinkled, never messy. She likes to look perfect, just like she wants the neighborhood to be. When she walks, she moves fast, like she's on a mission. And when she talks about rules, her eyes get big and shiny, like she's super excited. To her, the neighborhood is her kingdom, and she's the queen. She thinks she can tell everyone what to do, and most people just nod and listen because they don't want trouble. But Jake? He was different. He didn't fight her, but he didn't back down either. Every time Karen came over to complain, he'd just stand there, listening. Yes, ma'am, he'd say again, polite as can be. One time, she yelled at him in front of everyone. It was a sunny afternoon, and a bunch of neighbors were outside. Kids were playing, and grown ups were chatting. Karen marched up to Jake's yard, her clipboard flapping in her hand. "This flagpole is a disgrace," she screamed. "You're ruining everything. Take it down, or I'll make you sorry." Her face was so red, it looked like it might pop. The neighbors stopped talking and stared. "Jake?" He just nodded. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and then he turned back to his yard like nothing happened. The neighbors shook their heads. "He's too nice," one said. "Karen's going to walk all over him," another whispered. They thought Jake was weak because he didn't shout back. They thought he was afraid because he didn't argue. But they were wrong. Jake wasn't weak. He wasn't afraid. He was waiting. Waiting for what? You'll see soon. That flagpole Karen hated so much. It wasn't just a flagpole. It was part of something bigger, something that was going to turn this whole story upside down. Karen thought she was winning, but Jake? He was the one in control. And nobody, not Karen, not the neighbors, had any idea what was coming next. Stick around, because this is about to get really fun. Days kept passing in the quiet little neighborhood, and things started heating up. Karen Thompson, the HOA queen, wasn't calming down. Nope, she was getting louder and bolder every single day. She'd put on her neat clothes, grab her clipboard, and stomp over to Jake Miller's house like she was on a big mission. Her shoes would go clomp, clomp, clomp on the sidewalk, and everyone could hear her coming. When she got to Jake's yard, she'd stop, point at that flagpole, and yell like it was some kind of scary monster. "This thing is still here," she'd shout, her voice sharp and angry. "I've warned you, Jake. I'm not playing around anymore." One afternoon, she stood right in front of Jake's little white house with the red door. The sun was shining, and the flag on the pole was flapping in the breeze. Karen's face was red again, like it always got when she was mad. She shook her finger at Jake, who was outside pulling weeds from his tiny yard. "I've told you 100 times," she screamed. "That flagpole breaks the rules. I'm dialing 911 tomorrow if it's still up. You'll be sorry." Her words echoed down the street, and a few neighbors poked their heads out to see what was going on. Jake. He didn't yell back. He didn't even look scared. He just stood up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and gave her that shy little smile. "Okay, ma'am," he said, soft and calm. Then he went back to pulling weeds like nothing happened. The neighbors saw it all. They were outside watering flowers or walking their dogs, and they started whispering to each other. "Poor Jake," one lady said, shaking her head. "He can't stand up to Karen," a man added, watching from his porch. "She's too tough for him. He's no match for her." They felt bad for Jake. They thought he was weak because he didn't argue or fight back. Karen was loud and mean, and Jake was quiet and nice. To them, it looked like Karen was winning. They figured Jake was just going to give up and take the flagpole down because he didn't want trouble. But here's the thing, they didn't know Jake at all. He wasn't giving up. Not even close. Jake wasn't just sitting there doing nothing. Oh no, he was busy. Really busy. But he was sneaky about it, so nobody could tell. Every time Karen came over to yell, Jake did something smart. He watched her. His sharp eyes followed her every move. He listened to every word she said, even when she was shouting so loud the birds stopped singing. And here's the cool part: when she was done yelling, he'd pull out a little notebook from his pocket. It was small, with a brown cover, and it fit right in his hand. He'd take a pencil and scribble something down real quick. What was he writing? Nobody knew. Not Karen, not the neighbors, just Jake. Then he'd put the notebook back in his pocket and keep doing whatever he was doing, like watering his grass or fixing his mailbox. Karen didn't notice the notebook. She was too busy being mad. She'd stomp away after yelling, thinking she'd scare Jake good. But when she turned her back, something funny happened. Jake's shy smile would change. It'd get a little bigger, not a lot, just a tiny bit, and it'd turn into a smirk. A smirk is like a sneaky smile, the kind you make when you know something nobody else does. He'd nod at Karen as she walked off, but that smirk said he wasn't afraid. It said he was up to something. What was he planning? Why wasn't he fighting back like everyone expected? Oh, you'll see, it's all leading to something huge, something that's going to flip the story upside down. The days turned into weeks, and Karen kept coming back. She didn't give up. One morning, she banged on Jake's door so hard the windows shook. "Jake Miller," she hollered. "You've got one more chance. That flagpole is a disgrace, and I'm done waiting." Jake opened the door, calm as ever. "Yes, ma'am," he said, nodding again. Karen huffed and puffed, then marched off. Jake watched her go, and yep, out came the notebook. Scribble, scribble, scribble. Then he closed it and went inside. The neighbors saw that, too. "He's so quiet," a kid said to his mom. "Why doesn't he tell her to stop?" His mom shrugged. "Maybe he's just shy," she said. "But shy? Nope. Jake wasn't shy. He was tricky. Every time Karen threatened him, it was the same. She'd say, "I'm calling the cops, or you're in big trouble." And Jake would just nod and say, "Okay, ma'am." But that smirk? It kept showing up. When Karen wasn't looking, he'd grin to himself like he had a secret joke. The neighbors didn't get it. They thought Karen was too strong, too loud, too mean. They thought Jake was scared because he didn't shout back. But Jake wasn't scared. He wasn't weak. He was waiting. Waiting for what? That's the big question. Something was coming, something exciting, and Jake knew it, even if nobody else did. Let's think about that flagpole for a second. Karen hated it, but Jake didn't take it down. Why not? If he was so nice and quiet, why didn't he just do what she wanted? Because that flagpole wasn't just a flagpole. It was special. It was part of Jake's secret, and he wasn't going to let Karen ruin it. Every time she yelled about it, he wrote in his notebook. Every time she stomped away, he smirked. The neighbors didn't see it, but Jake was building up to something big. He wasn't fighting back with words or fists, he was fighting back with his brain. And that's way cooler, right? So, what was Jake up to? Why was he so calm when Karen was so loud? Why didn't he tell her to leave him alone? You're going to find out soon, I promise. This story is getting wilder every minute, and all those little clues, the notebook, the smirk, the flagpole, are leading somewhere awesome. The neighbors thought Jake was losing, but they were wrong. Karen thought she was winning, but she didn't know the truth. Jake was ready for something huge, and it was coming fast. Stick with me, because the next part is going to blow your mind. What do you think Jake's secret is? Any guesses? It's all building up, and it's going to be so much fun when it explodes. The next morning came fast, and Karen Thompson was ready to make trouble. She'd been yelling about Jake's flagpole for weeks, and now she was done waiting. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky orange and yellow. Birds were chirping, but Karen didn't care about that. She was mad, super mad. She grabbed her phone from the kitchen table, her fingers shaking a little because she was so worked up. She dialed 911, the number for emergencies, and when someone answered, she didn't even say hello. She just screeched into the phone, loud enough to wake up half the neighborhood. "There's a man breaking HOA rules with an illegal flagpole," she shouted. "Send someone now. Right now." Her voice was high and squeaky, like a whistle. She stood on her porch, arms crossed, smirking to herself. She thought she'd finally won. The neighbors heard her yelling, and they couldn't help but peek out their windows. Curtains moved a little, and eyes watched from behind the glass. They knew Karen was serious this time. She really called the cops, one lady whispered to her husband. "This is going to be big drama," a kid said, pressing his nose against the window. Everyone expected something wild to happen. They thought Jake was in trouble, big trouble. A few minutes later, a police car rolled down the quiet street. Its red and blue lights flashed, spinning around and lighting up the houses. The car stopped right in front of Jake's little white house with the red door. Karen stood there, still smirking, her arms crossed tight. She was ready to see Jake get caught, maybe even put in handcuffs. She thought this was her big moment. But then, something crazy happened. The cop stepped out of the car, and he didn't look mad or serious. He looked happy. He waved at Jake like they were best friends. Jake was outside, standing by his flagpole, calm as ever. He didn't run or hide. He just walked over to the cop, easy and slow, like it was no big deal. Karen's jaw dropped, her mouth fell open so wide you could see her teeth. She couldn't believe it. Jake shook the cop's hand and said, "Hey, Tom. Good to see you." His voice was friendly, not scared at all. The cop, whose name was Tom, laughed a little. "You still stirring up trouble, huh?" he said, smiling big. They acted like old buddies catching up, not like a cop coming to arrest someone. The neighbors blinked, confused. "What's happening?" a man muttered from his porch. "Why are they laughing?" a girl asked her mom. Karen's smirk was gone now. Her face turned white, like she'd seen a ghost. She didn't know what to say. And then came the big reveal, the moment that changed everything. Jake wasn't just some quiet new guy who moved in. Nope. He was an undercover cop. That means he was a secret police officer, pretending to be a regular person while he worked on a big, important case. And guess where he was working? Right there in that sleepy little neighborhood. Now, let's talk about that flagpole, the one Karen hated so much. It wasn't just a stick with a flag on it. Oh no, it was way more than that. Up at the top, hidden where nobody could see, was a tiny camera. Yep, a little sneaky camera, watching everything. Jake had put it there on purpose. Every day, that camera recorded what was happening on the street. It saw Karen yelling, it saw her stomping around with her clipboard, and it saw a lot more, too. Karen and her nosy friends weren't just nagging about lawns and rules. They were up to something shady, something not so nice. Jake had been watching them the whole time, and they didn't even know it. Karen's eyes got wide as Jake started talking. He turned to the crowd of neighbors, who were all outside now, standing on their lawns or porches. "I've been here for a reason," Jake said, his voice still calm but strong. "I'm not just your neighbor. I'm a cop, and I've been keeping an eye on some bad stuff going on around here." The neighbors gasped. "A cop," one lady said, clutching her coffee cup. "Bad stuff," a kid whispered, his eyes big. Karen took a step back, her phone still in her hand. She looked like she wanted to run, but her feet wouldn't move. Officer Tom, the cop who came in the car, nodded. "Jake's been working with us," he said. "That flagpole? It's got a camera on it. We've been watching everything." He looked at Karen, and she gulped. "Everything," she squeaked, her voice tiny now. Jake nodded. "Yep. Everything. And trust me, Karen, it's not just about lawns." The neighbors started buzzing, talking to each other. "What does he mean?" one asked. "What's Karen been doing?" another wondered. Jake didn't tell them all the details yet, but he gave a little hint. "Some people have been helping the wrong kind of folks," he said. "And we've got it all on video." Karen's face went from white to red again, but this time it wasn't because she was mad. She was embarrassed, super embarrassed. She'd been yelling at Jake for weeks, thinking he was just a quiet guy she could boss around. But now, she realized he'd been smarter than her the whole time. That flagpole she hated? It was the key to everything. It had caught her and her friends doing sneaky things they didn't want anyone to know about. And Jake? He'd been playing along, letting her think she was in charge, when really, he was the one with the power. The neighbors couldn't believe it. "Jake's a cop," a man said, scratching his head. "And that flagpole's a camera," a girl giggled, pointing at it. They looked at Jake differently now. He wasn't just the shy new guy anymore. He was a hero, a secret hero who'd been working hard to keep them safe. Karen, though. She looked smaller now, standing there with her arms hanging by her sides. Her big, loud voice was gone. She didn't know what to say, and for once, she didn't try to yell. This was the big moment, the climax of the story. Jake's secret was out, and it was way cooler than anyone thought. The flagpole wasn't just a decoration, it was a tool. And Jake wasn't just a neighbor, he was a cop catching bad guys. Karen thought she'd get him in trouble, but instead, she got herself caught. The neighbors cheered a little, clapping for Jake. "Way to go," a kid shouted. Officer Tom tipped his hat to Jake. "Good job, buddy," he said. And Jake? He just smiled, that same shy smile, but now everyone knew it meant something big. The story wasn't over yet, but oh boy, this twist was the best part so far. What happens next? You'll see, it's going to be awesome. Karen stood there, frozen, her face as white as a ghost. She couldn't believe what was happening. This is outrageous," she stammered, her voice shaky and small. She didn't sound like the loud, bossy HOA queen anymore. She sounded scared. But Jake wasn't finished yet. He turned to the crowd of neighbors, who were all gathered around now, watching with big eyes. "For months," Jake said, his voice calm but clear, "I've been tracking some shady stuff around here. Shady stuff means bad things, sneaky, not so nice things. And Karen," he added, looking right at her. "She's been helping the wrong people without even knowing it." The neighbors gasped. "Helping the wrong people," a lady whispered. "What does that mean?" a kid asked, tugging his mom's sleeve. Officer Tom, the cop who came in the police car, stepped up and nodded. "Yep," he said. "Jake's been watching everything with that camera on the flagpole. We've got what we need now thanks to him." Karen's eyes got wide, and she took a step back. She didn't know what to say. She'd been yelling at Jake all this time, thinking she was in charge, but now she was the one in trouble. By the end of the day, things changed fast. Karen wasn't just embarrassed, she was in big trouble. The police had proof from Jake's camera that she'd been helping some not-so-good people, even if she didn't mean to. Maybe she thought she was just being nosy or bossy, but it turned out she'd gotten mixed up in something serious. The neighbors couldn't believe it. "Karen's not the queen anymore," a man said, shaking his head. "The HOA, the group that makes the rules, picked a new leader. Someone nicer, someone who didn't yell all the time. Karen." She had to step down and face the mess she'd made. Jake, though, didn't have to hide anymore. He wasn't the shy, quiet new guy now, he was the hero. Neighbors who used to walk past him without a word suddenly wanted to talk. "Hey, Jake," a lady called, waving from her porch. "Good job," a kid shouted, running over. One man even walked up and shook Jake's hand. "You're amazing," he said, smiling big. Jake just nodded and smiled back, that same shy smile, but now it felt different. Everyone knew he was brave and smart. They looked at him like he was the coolest person on the street. And that flagpole? It stayed right where it was, standing tall in Jake's yard. The flag on top waved proudly in the wind, flapping back and forth. It wasn't just a flagpole anymore, it was a little reminder of who really won. Karen had tried to get rid of it, but Jake kept it up, and now it was like a trophy. Every time the neighbors saw it, they'd think of how Jake tricked everyone and saved the day. "That's Jake's flagpole," a girl said to her friend, pointing. "It's awesome." By nighttime, the street was buzzing with talk. Karen was gone, off to deal with her trouble, and the neighborhood felt lighter. Jake didn't have to pretend anymore, and the neighbors weren't scared of the HOA like before. Justice was served, Karen got caught, and Jake came out on top. It was a happy ending for the good guy, and everyone loved it. Okay, let's finish this story with something cool to think about, something that makes you feel smart and strong. Here's the big idea: sometimes the person you think is weak is really the strongest one of all. Let's look at Jake Miller one more time. He was the quiet guy, right? The new kid on the block who didn't talk loud or make a big fuss. Neighbors saw him and thought, "Oh, he's just shy. He's not tough or special." Karen, the HOA queen, thought that too. She yelled at him, bossed him around, and figured he'd just do what she said because he didn't fight back. But guess what? Jake wasn't weak at all. He was super strong, stronger than anyone knew. Jake didn't need to shout or argue like Karen did. He didn't stomp his feet or wave his arms. Nope. He stayed calm and waited for the perfect moment. He watched, he listened, and he used his brain. That's real strength, knowing when to be quiet and when to act. When the time was right, Jake showed everyone who he really was, a smart, brave cop with a big secret. He didn't have to yell to win. He just let Karen dig her own hole, and then bam, he came out on top. That's pretty awesome, right? It shows you don't need a loud voice or big muscles to be powerful. Sometimes, waiting and thinking is the best way to be strong. Now, let's talk about Karen. She learned something the hard way. She judged Jake by what she saw on the outside. She saw a quiet guy with a flagpole, and she thought, he's nothing. I can boss him around. She didn't stop to wonder who he really was or what he could do. She just decided he was weak because he didn't act like her, loud and bossy. But that backfired big time. Judging people by how they look or act can get you in trouble. Karen found out Jake wasn't weak at all. He was way smarter than she ever guessed. Her mistake made her look silly, and she lost everything she thought she controlled. So, the lesson here? Don't be too quick to decide who someone is. You might be wrong, and it could come back to surprise you. Next time you meet someone quiet, maybe take a second to think. What if they've got a secret? What if they're hiding something cool, like Jake did? Maybe they're not shy or scared, maybe they're just waiting for their moment. The ones who don't talk a lot, who stay silent and watch. They're often the ones you'll never see coming. Like Jake with his flagpole and his sneaky camera, they might be planning something big. You never know what's going on inside someone's head, and that's what makes people so interesting. This story isn't just about Jake and Karen, it's about you, too. Maybe you felt like Jake sometimes, like people don't notice you or think you're not strong. But guess what? You don't have to prove anything right away. You can be quiet and still be powerful. You can wait, watch, and pick the perfect time to shine. Or maybe you've met a Karen, someone who acts big and loud and thinks they're better. Don't let them trick you into feeling small. Keep being you, because the quiet ones, the smart ones, the ones who think before they act, they're the ones who win in the end. So, here's something to carry with you: strength isn't always loud. It's not always in your face, shouting for everyone to see. Sometimes it's quiet, sneaky, and super smart like Jake. And the people who judge too fast, like Karen? They might miss out on the real story. Be the Jake in your own life, calm, clever, and ready for your big moment. Because the ones who stay silent, they're the ones who surprise everyone. And that's the coolest kind of strength there is. What do you think? Could you be a secret hero like Jake? I bet you could.